The elders had always spoken in riddles, their wisdom wrapped in vague warnings that the younger species often dismissed as superstition. Among the many edicts whispered through the halls of the Galactic Council, one stood out above all: never challenge humanity. It was an ancient command, repeated so often it had become almost ceremonial, a phrase uttered in hushed tones, passed down from one ruling generation to the next. But as centuries passed and the balance of power shifted, those who had once feared humanity faded from relevance, replaced by ambitious new leaders who saw the warning as nothing more than an outdated relic. Grand Warlord Vivarin of the Xyrath Dominion was one such leader. He was young by his people's standards, barely 400 years old, yet already he had led his fleets to victory against two rival empires. His dominion stretched across dozens of star systems, and his armies were unmatched in brutality and efficiency. To him, the warning about humanity was nothing more than a coward's excuse, a myth designed to keep the lesser races in line. He saw no reason to fear a species that, by all accounts, was barely 2,000 years into its interstellar expansion. He had listened in silence as the elders of the council repeated their usual doctrine, their hollow voices echoing through the chamber. He had watched as the weaker races, those who had no fleet, no armies, nodded solemnly, as if the words held some profound truth. But Viran had no patience for ghost stories. His people had been forged in war, their empire built on the ashes of conquered civilizations. Humanity, he reasoned, would be no different. When the council session ended, he did not wait for pleasantries. He stormed from the chamber, his long cloak trailing behind him, his advisors struggling to keep pace. They spoke cautiously, some daring to remind him of the dangers of disregarding the elders' words, others whispering about past civilizations that had tested humanity and vanished from history. Varen scoffed at their fear. If humanity is as dangerous as the elders claim, he said, then where is the evidence? Show me their great victories, show me the empires they have destroyed. None could answer him. The records of past conflicts were vague, deliberately obscured by those who had survived. There were no detailed battle reports, no grand accounts of military conquests. Only silence, as if the truth itself had been erased. That, more than anything, convinced Viren that the warning was a lie, so he made his decision. It began with a simple incursion. Xyrath warships breached human-controlled space, skirting the edges of their territory in what he called a test of resolve. He wanted to see if they would fight, if they would react as the Council feared they might. At first, humanity did nothing. No fleets mobilized, no threats were issued. Their colonies remained silent, their military unmoved. It was as if they had not even noticed his presence. Encouraged by their passivity, he escalated. He ordered his forces to raid a border outpost, capturing the human station intact, taking its inhabitants as prisoners. Still, no retaliation. Reports from the station commander indicated that the humans barely resisted, surrendering as soon as the first shots were fired. Varen was unimpressed. Was this the mighty species the elders had feared for so long, a people who surrendered without a fight? He laughed as he read the reports, his confidence swelling. Humanity was weak, and if they would not fight, then he would give them no choice. The first full-scale invasion came a month later. A fleet of 100 warships descended upon a human colony world, overwhelming its orbital defenses in a matter of hours. Varen watched from his flagship as the surface burned, his soldiers marching through the streets of human cities, crushing any resistance with ease. The battle was over before it had truly begun. The planet was his. Still, there was no response from humanity. No counterattack, no diplomatic outcry. The Galactic Council murmured in concern, but none dared to intervene. The elders remained silent, their faces unreadable, their ancient eyes watching as if they had seen this play out before. Varen took their silence as confirmation of his victory. Humanity had been tested, and they had failed. The warning had been nothing more than a fable. He was the first to prove it false, the first to shatter the illusion of human strength. He did not notice how quiet the humans had become. Not until it was too late. The warships of the Xyrath Dominion hung motionless in the void above the conquered human colony, their black hulls reflecting the dim light of the distant star. On the surface, Xyrath banners fluttered over shattered buildings, marking the world as their own. The streets were silent except for the rhythmic march of patrols. The humans had been subdued, their forces crushed, their defenses torn apart with brutal efficiency. It was a victory that should have been celebrated. But there was no triumph in the air, only an unsettling stillness that crept into the bones of even the most hardened warriors. Grand Warlord Varin stood in the command chamber of his flagship, staring at the planet below. His officers spoke in low voices, delivering reports on the occupation. Resistance had been minimal, just as before. The humans had surrendered quickly, their leadership offering no demands, no negotiations. It was an effortless conquest, yet something about it gnawed at him. He did not understand why. The humans in the city did not look like prisoners. They did not cower in fear, did not beg for mercy as so many species had before. They obeyed orders, moved where they were told, but their eyes held no submission. It was as if they were waiting. For what, he did not know. "Why is there no rebellion?" Varin asked, turning toward his chief strategist, a veteran officer who had crushed countless uprisings across the Dominion's conquests. "A species that loses its world fights to reclaim it. The humans do nothing. Why?" The strategist hesitated before answering. "Perhaps they know it is pointless. They see our strength and accept their fate." Varin narrowed his eyes. That was what logic dictated, yet something in the human silence unsettled him. The absence of struggle was not submission, it was patience. "Increase patrols, tighten security. If they will not resist, we will break their spirits another way," Varin said. His orders were carried out swiftly. The occupation tightened. Curfews were enforced, surveillance intensified. Yet the humans continued their eerie compliance, neither provoking nor resisting their conquerors. Reports from intelligence officers noted an absence of whispered plots, no secret gatherings, no signs of defiance. The planet was a corpse without rebellion. It should have reassured him. It did not. Then the disappearances began. It started with a single patrol. 5 elite Xyrath soldiers vanished without a trace. Their communication signals had been active one moment and silent the next. No alarms, no reports of struggle. When a second patrol failed to check in, Varin sent an investigation team. They found nothing. No bodies, no signs of conflict. It was as if the soldiers had ceased to exist. Panic spread through the ranks. Soldiers walked the streets in pairs, then in groups. Weapons were drawn at the slightest movement. Fear clawed at the edges of their discipline. Varin ordered the city locked down. No human was to leave their assigned quarters. The Dominion's forces scoured every alley, every shadowed corridor. Still, the disappearances continued. Entire squads vanished in a single night. Their tracking devices were disabled moments before they went dark, their weapons left behind as if discarded. Varin clenched his fists as he listened to the latest report. He had crushed civilizations beneath his heel. He had faced enemy fleets that blotted out the stars. Never had he encountered an enemy that did not fight, yet still destroyed his forces one by one. "This is not a war," he muttered, staring at the planet below. "This is a hunt." He did not realize how right he was. Not yet. The silence had become unbearable. Grand Warlord Vaharin stood at the center of his war room, staring at the holographic map of the city below. The occupation had turned into a nightmare. His patrols were disappearing faster than reinforcements could arrive. His soldiers no longer moved with the confidence of conquerors, but with the paranoia of prey. Something was hunting them, and he still did not know what. He had doubled security again. Every remaining patrol operated in large squads, their weapons primed, their orders clear. shoot anything that moved in the shadows. Yet it made no difference. Even heavily armed teams, covered by aerial surveillance, continued to vanish. There were no bodies, no screams, no alarms, just silence. The reports from the officers had changed. They no longer spoke of military strategy or insurgency. They whispered of ghosts. Some claimed that the humans had unlocked forbidden technology, that their disappearances were the result of some invisible weapon. Others believed the humans had never truly surrendered at all, that the compliance had been a facade, a delay until their real plan was set in motion. Varin did not believe in superstition, but he could not ignore the numbers. In the first week of occupation, he had lost a handful of soldiers. In the second, dozens. By the end of the third, entire battalions were gone. The more soldiers he sent to secure the streets, the faster they vanished. It was as if the humans had become part of the darkness itself. The tipping point came when the command post in the center of the capital city went dark. The garrison there had been the largest, housing over 5,000 Zirath warriors. It was a fortress of steel, reinforced by automated turrets, protected by energy barriers. If any location was safe, it was that one. Yet in the span of a single night, it was gone. The alarms never sounded. The defenses remained intact, but when the first transport arrived with supplies, there was no one left. Weapons were found scattered across the floor, some with the triggers pulled, yet no signs of impact. The surveillance footage had been wiped clean. The command center was still fully powered, its systems untouched, as if nothing had happened. But the garrison had vanished without a trace. Varin watched the footage taken by the soldiers who entered the site the next morning. Hallways were empty, yet the soldiers had abandoned their posts mid-thack. Meals had been left uneaten. Terminals were still running. He could see where warriors had stood just hours before. But now, there was only stillness. It was impossible. A force of that size did not simply disappear. There should have been signs of a struggle, blood, damage, evidence of an attack, but there was nothing. It was as if his soldiers had been plucked from reality itself. Panic spread like wildfire. Soldiers refused to leave their quarters. Officers ignored commands. Varin executed deserters in an attempt to maintain order, but fear had already consumed the ranks. He could see it in their eyes. They no longer looked at the humans as prisoners. They saw them as something else entirely. He tried to contact his war council in orbit. The fleet was still stationed above, ready to reinforce the occupation if necessary. Yet his messages were met with silence. No response, no signals, no sign that the fleet was even still there. That was when he felt it. A deep, primal instinct buried within him since the dawn of his species. He was no longer the hunter. He was the hunted. Varin clenched his fists as he paced across the bridge of his flagship. The silence from the fleet was absolute. He had sent multiple encrypted transmissions, each carrying the highest priority clearance. None had received a response. His officers were too afraid to speak, their gazes flickering between their monitors and him, waiting for orders that no longer mattered. Fear radiated from every corner of the ship. He had never experienced anything like this. Even in the most brutal wars, there had always been logic, a path forward, whether through force, strategy, or sheer overwhelming firepower. Now, logic failed him. The fleet was still visible from the planet's surface, hanging like a black curtain between the colony and the stars. Yet no messages came, no signals, no movements. It was as if his warships were lifeless shells. He turned toward his communications officer. Send a direct link to the bridge of the Wrath of Zirath. The Wrath was his flagship's sister vessel, commanded by High Captain Sulkar, a warrior as ruthless as he was loyal. If anyone remained at their post, it would be him. The officer obeyed, routing the signal. For several agonizing seconds, the command deck remained silent, the crew holding their breath. Then, the screen flickered. A connection had been established. Sulkar appeared on the screen, or rather what remained of him. He sat motionless in his command chair, his body slumped forward, his eyes vacant. Blood streaked across his armor, dark against the dim emergency lighting of the Wrath's bridge. His hands rested limply at his sides. Behind him, the rest of the crew lay where they had fallen, motionless, as if sleep had taken them all at once. There were no signs of an attack, no scorch marks from weapons fire. The ship's system still ran, but everyone aboard was dead. Viren's breath caught in his throat. This was not war. This was annihilation without conflict. His officers stared in horror, the reality of the situation settling over them like a suffocating weight. A soft crackling sound came through the transmission, low at first, then rising in volume. A whisper. He strained to hear, his pulse hammering in his ears. The whisper became words. Not in the guttural dialect of the Zirath, nor in the formal speech of the Galactic Council. It was human. They told you not to challenge us. Varen's blood turned to ice. His warriors were gone. His fleet was silent. His entire campaign had unraveled without a single battle. His mistake had not been underestimating humanity's military strength. His mistake had been assuming that humanity fought wars the way other species did. He turned to his officers. "Break orbit, now!" No one hesitated. The bridge crew scrambled to comply, fear overriding protocol. Engines roared to life, and the flagship began to ascend, tearing away from the colony's surface. The remaining ships of his fleet, those that still had living crews, moved in formation. Varen's eyes locked onto the planet below. The humans were still there, standing in their cities, looking up at the sky, watching him leave. They had never been conquered. They had never surrendered. They had simply been waiting. The ship's engines roared as the flagship cut through the planet's atmosphere, breaking free of the silent world below. Varen stood at the command deck, his claws digging into the metal railing as he watched the shrinking surface of the human colony fade beneath a layer of swirling clouds. His officers worked in frantic silence, their movements precise but rushed, driven by something stronger than discipline. Fear. None dared to speak, none dared to look at him. The fleet, or what was left of it, moved with them. The ships that had responded to his orders rose in tight formation, their dark hulls reflecting the eerie glow of the distant star. But he knew something was wrong. His instincts clawed at his mind, screaming at him that this was not an escape. It was a mistake. "Status report," he barked, forcing authority back into his voice. An officer hesitated before speaking, his voice strained. "All remaining ships have broken orbit. We have lost contact with 12 additional vessels. No distress signals, no signs of engagement." Varen clenched his jaw. The silence had followed them into space. The humans had not fired a single shot, yet his forces were being picked apart. He had abandoned the colony, abandoned the ground war, and yet nothing had changed. The threat had not been planetary. It had been something far greater. He turned toward the weapons officer. "Arm the fleet, full combat readiness. If anything moves that is not one of our own, I want it destroyed before it can reach us." The command was met with quick affirmations, and the ship's weapons systems powered up. Screens flickered with targeting data, scanning for any sign of movement, but the void remained empty. No ships pursued them. No human vessels emerged from the colony below. There was nothing. Then the lights flickered. A sharp electric pulse surged through the ship, dimming the consoles for a fraction of a second before stabilizing. The officers stiffened, their eyes darting across the command deck. Varen felt his breath catch. He turned toward the control panels, scanning for anomalies. "Report," he ordered. The systems officer's hands trembled over the controls. "Unknown energy surge detected. Source unknown." Varen narrowed his eyes. "Unknown? Find the source." The officer's fingers danced over the interface, running diagnostic scans at an increasingly frantic pace. Then he stopped. His breath hitched. His gaze remained fixed on the screen, unmoving. Varen stepped forward, his patience fraying. "What is it?" The officer swallowed hard. "Sir?" "The energy surge is coming from within the ship." A cold chill spread through Varen's chest. He stared at the officer, his mind rejecting the implication. The ship was sealed. The corridors were monitored. There was no way. The lights flickered again. Then the first scream echoed through the halls. It came from the lower decks, raw and filled with terror. A second scream followed, then a third. The command deck fell into stunned silence as the sounds of panic spread through the ship's communication channels. Garbled voices shouted over one another. Orders turned into incoherent cries. Then static. Varen spun toward the security feed. The monitors displayed the lower decks, grainy footage of empty hallways and unmanned stations. No signs of conflict, no signs of an intruder. Yet his soldiers were dying. "Seal all sections," he snapped. "Activate internal defenses." The ship's automated security systems responded instantly, locking down compartments, deploying sentry turrets along the corridors. The emergency sirens wailed, casting an eerie red glow across the command deck. Then the feeds cut to black. Varen's heart pounded. His soldiers were armed. They were trained. Whatever had killed them had done so without resistance. He turned toward the weapons officer. "Fire on the human colony." The officer hesitated. "Sir?" "Do it," Varen growled. "If this is their doing, we burn them to ash." The officer's hands trembled as he activated the targeting systems. The ship's primary cannons powered up, locking onto the planet below. A fume filled the air as the weapons charged. Then the ship stopped moving. Varen staggered forward as the artificial gravity fluctuated. The vessel had come to a complete halt, not through manual control, but as if something had seized it. Alarms blared across the deck. Officers shouted in confusion. The navigation systems showed an impossible reading. Velocity 0. Something was holding them in place. Varen turned toward the viewport. His breath caught in his throat. The fleet, once moving in perfect formation, was now frozen in space. Ships drifted without propulsion, their engines flickering. His command ship, the pride of the Zurith Dominion, was paralyzed. A deep hum vibrated through the hull, a resonance that did not come from the ship's systems. It was external, a force beyond anything he had encountered before. His claws dug into the railing. Then the whispers returned, soft at first, then rising in volume, filling the ship like a suffocating presence. The same voice that had spoken through the dead fleet now echoed through the command deck. "You were warned." Varen's vision blurred. The lights dimmed, then brightened, flickering with an unnatural pulse. His officers clutched their heads, some collapsing, their eyes wide in horror. The voice did not belong to one person. It belonged to many. Layered upon itself, speaking in unison. "You believed you were the apex. You believed we were prey, but you never understood." The screens across the deck lit up, displaying something new. Not the fleet, not the ship's diagnostics. It was Earth, the human homeworld. "You thought this was war." Varen's chest tightened. The image of Earth grew sharper, zooming in, past its atmosphere, past its cities, then deeper beyond what the naked eye could see, into something ancient, something buried beneath the surface. "You thought we fought as others did." The image shifted. Massive structures, hidden for centuries, embedded deep within the planet's crust, pulsed with power. Behemoth machines, unseen by the galaxy, their purpose unknown. "You thought we were waiting for the right moment to fight back." The planet's core glowed with something unnatural, something alive. "We were never waiting." Varen's vision darkened. The last thing he heard before the ship was consumed by silence was a final whisper. "We were preparing